Hello, Cassie Woods here. Super excited to jump into this with you. How food influences your mood. All right, let's get right into it. Okay, so what you eat can make a huge impact in your mood, happiness, and how you feel overall. We're going to talk about that, a little bit of how that happens, and what are some things that you can do to really be in control of this. Okay, so the reason why food has such an impact on how you feel is because foods interact with and control your hormones, neurotransmitters, and other chemicals in the body. Largely, this is happening through the gut and the gut-brain axis. So what that means is that the food that you're eating can cause you to feel more happiness and joy, literally, or more stress, anxiety, or fatigue, depending on how it is interacting with the body, with hormones, with neurotransmitters, all of those kinds of things. So it's really important to pay attention. So the current research right now has discovered that the microbiome is producing more neurotransmitters than the brain. This is super important. We'll get into it here in just a moment. But this is something that you really want to think about here, that the microbiome is producing more neurotransmitters than the brain. So this is, again, super, super important. But the food that we're eating is either starving or feeding the bacteria in our microbiome responsible for modulating hormones, adrenals, metabolism, and mood through the gut-brain axis. So that microbiome that's in our gut that's kind of modulating all these different systems, the food that we're eating, we are actually deciding, what types of bacteria to feed and what types to starve. So by what we're eating, we're either feeding pathogenic, which is going to give us more inflammation, more stress, more anxiety, more kind of that negative signaling, or feeding the beneficial, which is going to give us, some of those more positive food feelings, positive mood states, less inflammation, better immune function, more happiness, all of those things. And we'll get into it here in just a moment. Okay, so neurotransmitters. What are neurotransmitters and what are they necessary for? So if you remember, we just talked about the fact that current research is telling us that more neurotransmitters are being produced in our gut than in our brain. And so what are they all about? Why do they matter? So things like the general feeling of happiness or well-being. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter, and that's kind of one of the jobs of serotonin. Pleasure, drive, and motivation. Dopamine, that's another neurotransmitter that's largely produced in our gut. So those are some of the jobs of that neurotransmitter. GABA, which its job is basically to restore calm. So if you're somebody that has a lot of anxiety, or you're an overthinker, you worry a lot, or you just, you panic, all of those kinds of things. Likely that is because of an imbalance of GABA, the neurotransmitter GABA. So that's one that is largely produced in the gut. And then focus, concentration, alertness, all of those kinds of things, that fight or flight response. Norepinephrine is one of the neurotransmitters that is responsible for those types of feelings. So these are some of the things that neurotransmitters do, why we need them. And if we think back and we look at the fact that a lot of these specific neurotransmitters are being produced in our gut, and some of the communication happening within our body, is really impacted by the food that we're eating. It's very important to pay attention to a few of these things. Okay, so foods that raise cortisol. So there's certain foods that you can eat that are going to increase cortisol, which is our stress hormone. Decrease neurotransmitter levels and sensitivity. So these are foods that are, feeding the more pathogenic bacteria and starving out some of that more beneficial bacteria that is going to be helping with neurotransmitter production. Foods that increase inflammation and damage the gut lining. So contribute to leaky gut, which it's said that about 80% of the population is dealing with right now. If we eat foods like that, typically how that's going to make us feel is lethargic and tired, stressed, anxious, depressed, and overwhelmed. And I know there's a lot of us that are, feeling those types of feelings entirely too often. And I want to give you some things to think about as what you can do just with nutrition alone to help change some of that. So what are some of the most common foods causing stress, anxiety, and fatigue? So the 5 mood-busting foods that we are going to quickly go over. Number 1 is sugar, okay? So things like candy, pop, candy, cupcakes, cookies, even artificial sweeteners, so things like Splenda or Sweet and Low, so aspartame, sucralose, anything that says sugar-free or diet typically has some type of an artificial sweetener in it. These things are, number 1, highly inflammatory. Number 2, very, very damaging to the gut lining and also to the actual bacteria and microbiome. Number 3, they increase cortisol. So that's that stress hormone. So these types of foods are going to increase cortisol. Number 4, they cause spikes in insulin. And what happens when we have a spike in insulin is that our serotonin levels dip. So if you're eating a lot of sugar, you typically have a lot of mood instability. You might get on a little bit of a high and then you come crashing down. And you have the highs and lows and all those kinds of things. So sugar, very damaging, very inflammatory, and can just in itself cause mood instability. So that's definitely one that we want to avoid, especially if you're dealing with a lot of anxiety, irritability, fatigue, any of those kinds of things. You want to avoid sugar. Okay, the next thing is margarine and other hydrogenated oils. So this is another thing that is in a lot of processed type foods, diet type foods, things along those lines. So one of the reasons that we want to stay away from margarine and hydrogenated oils, it's very toxic to the brain. It's very, very inflammatory, and again, very damaging to that gut lining. So contributing to leaky gut, which has been shown to increase anxiety, stress, all of those kinds of things. So deep fried foods, a lot of processed foods, different things like that are going to have hydrogenated oils or margarine or just kind of that fake butter in them. So that's something we definitely want to avoid. Processed foods. So this is kind of your center aisles of the grocery store. If it comes in a package or a box and it has an expiration date that is several years in the future, it is typically not good for you. So these types of foods typically have a lot of those hydrogenated oils, sugars, additives, chemicals, dyes, all of these kinds of things that are toxic to the brain, toxic to the body, increase cortisol, decrease neurotransmitters, just overall, wreak havoc on your system. And so processed foods are really something that you want to minimize or cut out, as much as possible. Because if you are dealing with, stress and anxiety and overwhelm or some of these issues that a lot of us are facing, truly processed foods are one of the biggest culprits to some of these issues. Okay, so the next one is alcohol and mixers. So alcohol can be very damaging to the gut lining. Things like red wine in moderation. There's some benefits to red wine in moderation, but things like mixed drinks, margaritas, anything that's alcohol with some type of a mixer in it, or something like a beer that's highly processed, or even some wines that are highly processed, or different things that are highly processed. Can be very damaging to the gut lining, again, very inflammatory, and can just be destabilizing for your mood overall. So if you're already dealing with anxiety and maybe this is your way of winding down, in the short term, it might possibly feel like, it's helpful, but overall in the long term, it's typically making the problem worse as far as neurotransmitter, production and cortisol and some of these other hormonal things that we have going on. So making sure that you're limiting alcohol intake and really trying to stay away from some of those more sugary or more processed type drinks. Okay, and then too much caffeine. This is another one. If you are dealing with anxiety or overwhelm or stress or insomnia or any of these kinds of things, really pay attention to your caffeine intake. A little bit of caffeine, it can be really beneficial for your mood and for your gut, but overdoing it on caffeine can be very damaging to cortisol levels. Again, elevate cortisol levels, which is going to decrease some of those other neurotransmitters that we need. So things like energy drinks, we really want to stay away from. Soda, we really want to stay away from. And coffee, if you're drinking coffee all through the day, it may be something that is doing more harm than good. So especially if you're dealing with anxiety. Okay, so enough of what we don't want to eat. That's no fun. Let's dive into a few foods that you can add in for less stress. So there's 3 things that we're going to focus on. Number 1 is going to be foods that reduce cortisol. Cortisol is your body's primary stress hormone. When this goes up, many of the positive hormones in your body and neurotransmitters in your body go down. When cortisol goes up, you'll often experience irritability, blood sugar highs and lows, and you can also experience disturbances in sleep, like insomnia, trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, all of those kinds of things. So elevated cortisol is something that's super, super common in women, and something that a lot of us want to look out for. If you're feeling, the wired and tired, or that you're a little more cranky or irritable, or, if you're having issues, with weight loss resistance, or kind of like that midsection, belly fat, those are all signs that you have elevated cortisol levels. And so eating foods that can help with reducing cortisol can be really beneficial. Okay, the number 2 thing that we want to work on is foods that increase dopamine. So dopamine is the pleasure and reward neurotransmitter. Substantial amounts of this are produced in the gut. The higher that your dopamine levels are, and the better that your dopamine sensitivity is. So this is with that gut-brain communication that's really, really important. So with that gut-brain axis, the happier that you tend to be. So the more dopamine that you have, and the better that communication is, so the better that your dopamine sensitivity is, the happier that you tend to be. People that are high in dopamine tend to be more driven and excited about life, have more motivation, just kind of more or pep in their step. And as we age, dopamine levels and sensitivities tend to drop naturally. So just as we age, it's something that we want to be mindful of paying attention to. Okay, and so then the third thing that we want to look at is foods that increase serotonin. This one is major, you guys. This is our feel-good neurotransmitter. So especially if you're looking for a way to improve your mood overall, your stress resilience, your just how you feel in general. Serotonin is largely responsible for those things. So 90 to 95% of the serotonin found in the body is actually found in the gut. And it's proven that there's specific bacteria strains that are actually responsible for the production. So it's necessary for you to have these very specific strains of bacteria present in your gut in order for you to have the appropriate levels of serotonin in your body. So if you're noticing, some of these issues with low serotonin, it's a very likely factor that you are probably missing some of these really specific types of bacteria in your gut. So serotonin improves mood, it helps with sleep, reduces hunger and sugar cravings, and then higher serotonin is also linked to actually living longer. So super important. Okay, so what are 5 mood boosting foods that you should be sure to add in every single day? Number 1 is nuts, seeds, and healthy fats. There's essential minerals and vitamins that are found in certain nuts, seeds, and some of these healthy fats. Things like magnesium, selenium. We need the fiber, we need the omegas for proper brain function, for decreasing inflammation, for improved gut health. All of these kinds of things. We need nuts, seeds, and healthy fats. So make sure you're adding in things like walnuts, Brazil nuts, almonds, flax, avocado, olive oil, all of these different things, nuts, seeds, and healthy fats. Make sure you're getting in plenty of those every day. Number 2, fruits and veggies. So with regards to cortisol, specifically fruits and veggies that are going to help increase vitamin C. So things like leafy greens, strawberries, kiwis, Bananas, onions, garlics, herbs, berries, blueberries, strawberries, all of these different things are super, super important, but we want to be eating a diverse variety of fruits and vegetables to help with increasing that beneficial bacteria, starving out the pathogenic bacteria, and just making sure that we're getting in plenty of variety there with the fruits and veggies. Okay, number 3 is protein. This is another one that is super, super important. When it comes to gut health, with the neurotransmitter production, there are some of the amino acids found in some of these different types of protein that are essential and precursors for the actual assimilation of some of the neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. So making sure that you're eating enough protein and that it's really, really good quality. Things like wild-caught salmon, which are going to have some of those amino acids that are really important, but then also some of the omegas that we really need for decreasing inflammation, for brain health, all of those kinds of things. Things like grass-fed beef. And then also some microbiome boosting, more plant-based proteins. So lentils, legumes, chickpeas, different things along those lines that are more in the plant-based variety, but that are very specific to helping boost and improve that microbiome. Number 4 is fermented foods. Things like sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, kombucha, kefir, and tempeh, all really, really, really beneficial for increasing diversity in the microbiome, helping, with more of those live cultures, probiotics, all of those kinds of things. So adding in more fermented foods, again, there's a lot of research coming out right now, just associating, improved mood state with eating fermented foods daily. And then also another thing, our number 5 thing is carbs in moderation. So if you have ever been on or are following a type of diet protocol that completely eliminates a food group, that's always something to be aware of. We need proteins, we need fats, and we need carbohydrates, especially as women, for proper hormone function, for proper serotonin function, and production and assimilation. We have to have carbohydrates. They just need to be in moderate portions, and they need to be in whole food, whole grain forms as much as possible. So things like yams, sweet potatoes, whole grains, oats, different things along those lines, just thinking of more of the complex carbs and in small, moderate portions. So those are our 5 key areas for mood boosting foods. Remember, the goal is to increase serotonin and dopamine levels while decreasing cortisol at the same time. This is when the biggest long-term benefits are felt, is when you're able to do this. And a big part of how this is done is through really manipulating and optimizing the microbiome, and then also the gut-brain communication. So be sure to check out the Good Mood Foods recipes. Volume 1, I've got 4 really good recipes in there for you to check out that are going to help reduce anxiety, reduce stress, and really help boost your mood in a couple of different ways. And then in summary, what we want to do is, number 1, we want to eat foods that are high in omega-3s. So this is super important for inflammation, brain health, all of those kinds of things, gut health. We want to make sure that we're eating foods high in omega-3s and supplementing with omega-3s. Number 2, we want to feed our beneficial bacteria with a diverse mix of fruits and veggies. This is super, super important. So making sure that you are eating for gut health, eating for a diverse microbiome, and you will see a huge difference in your mood state and overall how you feel. And number 3 is eating fermented foods for increased probiotics. This is just very, very important and beneficial to help with diversity. Number 4 is eating carbs in moderation. So not cutting out carbs, making sure that you're, still eating sweet potatoes, yams, rice, oatmeal, different things along those lines, just in moderation, and making sure that they are in whole food form as much as possible. And then making sure to eat good quality microbiome friendly proteins. So again, some of those amino acids that are found in some of those proteins are essential for some of the neurotransmitter production and assimilation. So make sure that you're getting in plenty of microbiome friendly protein. All right. If you found value in this, if you would do me a favor and respond to the email and let me know what your favorite part about this video was. And if you really thought this was good, do me a favor and share this with someone else that you know could use a little help in this area.